As you all know, the Conservative Party suffered a catastrophic election defeat. There's a new report on this from Policy Exchange, just so I can set the stage of why the Conservative Party deserve a period of self-reflection, one that I don't think they're going to take. So what this report found about sofa voters, this is what they're calling them. It's not one of those New York Post euphemisms. This is just for people that stayed at home. 2.7 million people that stayed at home, if they would have voted, could have swung the general election result. Just over half of British adults went to the ballot box this year, the lowest turnout in more than 2 decades. The following Policy Exchange report has found that 19 million people who did not make it to the polls on July 4th, 14% of them, 2.7 million, had strongly considered voting, but they just decided not to. It also found that 1 in 3 of those who stayed at home this year, so-called sofa voters, had turned up to the ballot box in 2019. This is Matt Goodwin's statistic that he was prophesying that at the next general election after the 2019 one, 6 in 10 Boris voters were not going to turn out and vote for the Conservatives, and many of them were not going to turn out at all. Seems to have been borne out in the statistics. Of these, half voted for the Conservatives in 2019, which meant that the Tories lost 2.8 million votes to the sofa. The findings, conducted by JL Partners pollsters, occasionally a suspect organisation because they partnered ahead of the election with the Rest is History. Sorry, the Rest is Politics podcast. I shouldn't defame Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man actor, in that way. The Rest is Politics podcast is with Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell, and they consistently underpolled Reform's performance, unlike other outlier polls. And often polls don't just reflect public will, they actively shape public will, and they discourage people for voting for insurgent parties because they think they're going to be the only one to do so, and it's a wasted vote, which is the reason why the Conservative Party stemmed many of their losses. That and Peter Hitchens constantly going, well, don't vote for Labour. Well, you're saying vote Conservative, aren't you, Peter? Oh, no, you should have read my policy in 2005, and we should have got rid of e-scooters and marijuana then. No, okay, no. Peter Hitchens did actively help the Conservatives stem their losses. But the point being, JL Partners, their research was questionable, though I did have a friend who is friends with one of the heads of JL Partners, despite his suspect associations with the Tony Blair Foundation. He said that he's friendly with Nigel. So we'll see. But I'm very skeptical of this entire industry. But I think this report accurately reflects the apathy, the kind of rot that had set in for your average British voter who believes that politicians just don't deliver on their promises. How do they get that impression? Well, 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019, 2024, Conservatives promised to bring levels of migration down. Before 2024, it was to the tens of thousands, and instead they got world historical levels of record net migration from the third world. Can't say I blame them, really. But anyway, that sort of 2.7, 2.8 million people could have swung the election in favour of the Conservatives. Not that I would have wanted that, because other than a few Conservative MPs that I did really admire, Miriam Cates, Danny Kruger kept his seat, and Kruger's squishy. Nick Fletcher, sorry, I was just listing off the newcons there for a moment. Dame Andrea Jenkins, and of course Liz Truss. Those people lost their seats, and that's a great shame, because otherwise we would have had a few allies within an otherwise treacherous Blairite, indistinguishable from the Lib Dems Conservative Party. But anyway, 3/4 of sofa voters now say they have no faith in politicians or politics to fix Britain's problems. 70% believe that the state of politics has deteriorated appreciably since 2019. 25% say they're very likely to vote in future, indicating that 4.8 million votes could be up for grabs from the non-voting population at the next election. So there's 4.8 million people who don't know who to vote for, but will vote for an alternative worthy to come along. Take note, Reform. The report found that sofa voters are likely to be young people from the north of England who did not graduate from university. The prime Reform constituency to capture. People who are temperamentally left-wing on economic issues, which Reform is not, but socially conservative, patriotic, red wall voters who do not like the modern Labour Party and who find the Conservative Party to be a radioactive brand no matter who holds the crossbar that puppeteers this corpse of an electoral engine. So let's go more granular into the report itself, because I'm just going to sort of set the stage here, right? You can download the PDF and read it in your own time, but I've got some quotes. So it says, on the face of it, the recent general election yielded one of the most decisive election results in the post-war period. Labour has been returned with 411 seats and a majority of 174, its largest ever, barring that secured by Blair in 1997 when something happened. The Conservative Party, in stark contrast, saw the largest fall in its vote share in history. It suffered a 10.8 swing to Labour and lost 211 seats in Parliament. Labour won with the lowest vote share by any victorious party in British history, however. On a dismal turnout, just 60% of those eligible to vote did so, the lowest figure in over 2 decades, and 7% falling on the 7% fall on the 2019 figure. No fewer than 4 million people who voted in 2019 stayed at home in 2024. Important to note that Keir Starmer won fewer overall votes than Jeremy Corbyn. It's just that Boris Johnson won a lot more voters than Jeremy Corbyn. So, the greatest demographic at the moment is disillusioned voters who believe the entire democratic system does not serve their interests. 4 million voters is enough to have made the difference between Labour or the Conservatives on July the 4th. SOFA voters are likely, as I said, to be young, around 40% younger than 34, non-graduates in the north of England. SOFA voters are the electoral manifestation of this disillusionment, and their numbers have been on the rise since the end of the Second World War. It seems that that's a sort of gravity well around which all of our politics is revolving, as I've repeatedly spoken about in the aftermath of October the 7th, the reassessment of our culture-blind immigration policy that has led to the Palestine marches. Now, it seems that Britain has lost faith in itself, despite this being the inciting incident for bulldog boomer nationalism. The kind that Nigel Farage very earnestly beats his chest for, the sort of biscuit tins, bunting, Winston Churchill, D-Day nationalism. Well, even though that's been a sort of fever pitch of British further for believing that we're on the right side of history, since then, participation in the franchise, since it was rolled out even more widely, it seems to be dropping off. People seem to be less interested in electoral politics than ever before, even though things culturally are getting more and more political, even though the personal has become wholly political, as Carol Hannish, I think, wisely once observed. Even though it's desirable to have a political and personal sphere separation, I don't think you can have that in mass democratic politics. And what happens is the political concepts spill over into the private life, which causes a want to disconnect and disengage from electoral processes. And that's where a lot of decision making is done. So, look, I know there's the phrase, we can't vote our way out of this. That's only insofar as there is no political representation for native British interests. Because it turns out in El Salvador, you can vote your way out of it. And they're, dare I say, even worse than we are, because even though we have mass demographic change, which is weighted against the peaceful and prosperous interests of the native population, El Salvador had literal satanic gangs whose charter was, rape, murder, pillage, and who were committing human sacrifices and engaging in cannibalism. They had the run of the country. And all it took was electing Nayib Bukele, who was very popular and who had the political will to do something about these gangs, to turn the entire country around. So it is possible. It's just at the moment, there is no politician brave enough to step forward and do what needs to be done. There are some rumblings from the reform camp. Richard Tice has made some very encouraging overtures to stronger policing and a zero-tolerance policy for ethnic enclaves rioting in Leeds, as has Lee Anderson. Lee Anderson's been consistently good on this, but not quite the strength or policy needed yet. Thank you for watching that clip from Tomlinson Talks. If you liked that and you would like to see more, you can get the full 90-minute show every week on a Wednesday afternoon, live from 3 p.m, only on lotuseaters.com, and all of the other content that my colleagues produce behind the paywall for as little as £5 a month. Thank you very much for supporting us, and I hope to see you there. Until next time, goodbye.